Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a quicker than usual bulletin. I was going to leave streaming until tomorrow, where we're going to do the World War II show. But given the event of the last 24 hours, I thought it better to come on here and at least address some of the issues involved. We are, of course, referring to the death of Hassan Nasrallah and a number of other leaders of the Hezbollah movement of Lebanon by means of aerial bombing carried out, of course, by, well, the planes that dropped the bombs had Israeli markings on them, but the planes themselves, the bombs and all of the technology involved are all, of course, American. So what I'm going to describe this as is it is a US assassination, just as the entire war in West Asia is a US and a British war, no matter what various officials of both countries might say. The Israelis are the ones pulling the triggers, but the Israelis are the ones playing the role that they've always had. And Hassan Nasrallah understood this role very well. And this is why he was such a dangerous opponent for the US imperialists. Now, I'll come to the details in just a moment. But first of all, I want to start off with a quote from Mao Zedong himself from this. Quotations of Chairman Mao. Mao, of course, had a lot of wise things to say, but when it comes to the question of martyrdom, he had this to say. And this is from a work entitled Serve the People from 1944. All men must die, but death can vary in its significance. The ancient Chinese writer Zhuma Qian said, "Though death befalls all men alike, it may be weightier than Mount Tai, or lighter than a feather. To die for the people is weightier than Mount Tai, but to work for the fascists and die for the exploiters and oppressors is lighter than a feather." And that, of course, applies with regard to the death of Nasrallah, who, though I, of course, am not Lebanese, nor am I a Muslim of either the Shia or the Sunni variety, I do recognize the man as a great revolutionary. He, in my view, is a revolutionary Lebanese patriot and a leader of the national liberation struggle within Lebanon. In fact, it's, I think, fair to say that Hezbollah represented in the modern period the only force capable of waging a national liberation struggle within Lebanon. And that is what made them so dangerous, not just to US imperialism, which of course clearly marked them down as enemies, but also to the regional comprador regimes, to the Jordanian king, to the dictatorship, whether in Egypt, whether it was run by Mubarak or al-Sisi, to the rotten, stinking wretches in Riyadh, the Saudi clique, to the dictators of the UAE. All of these have sought to, especially the Saudis, dominate and control Lebanon for many decades, and Hezbollah presented a coherent threat to that domination, which is why all of them will be celebrating the death of Nasrallah. We should not, of course, let religion or doctrinal differences mask the reality. Nasrallah must be saluted as a great revolutionary, and such a man, of course, has to be applauded for his revolutionary actions, and also he serves as an example for us in the manner of his life and death. He devoted his entire life to securing the liberation of the Lebanese people from the domination of US imperialism. He successfully led the Hezbollah movement in a long-term war against Israeli occupation. They successfully evicted the Israeli occupiers in the year 2000 from southern Lebanon. They defeated the Israelis in 2006, leading to the long-term decline of the Israeli regime. And they have been sustaining a long-term attritional war in the north of occupied Palestine for almost a year now. And it is all of this, plus, and I think this is what ultimately sealed Nasrallah's fate, his recent rejection of any possibility of a ceasefire with Israel that was separate from the Israelis giving up their war on Gaza. I think it was this that ultimately pushed the US imperialists into the decision to order his assassination. And make no mistake about it, Netanyahu will, of course, claim credit for this, but in my view, this is a plot cooked up jointly in Washington and London, principally Washington for this one, I think. And the Israelis wouldn't have done it if they didn't have the US imperialists absolutely 100% behind them. Netanyahu, in distinction to his public image, is actually a very, very cautious man. He doesn't do things unless he knows he's got the US absolutely behind him and ready to shield him and his government from consequences. And that has been the case all the way through this. I believe it was the Australian writer Kathleen Johnson, with whose explanations I frequently disagree, but she made a good point when she said, don't believe their words, look at their actions. And it's a point I've made here on this channel as well many times. Don't believe anything that the US imperialists or the British or the French or the Germans or the Italians say, or any member of the G7 countries. They're either imperialists or, in the case of a country like Japan, a broken stooge of imperialism. Look at what they do rather than what they say. Never trust a single damn word an imperialist says to you. Never trust a single agreement that he signs. Never trust any commitment that he gives, because all of them will be immediately broken. Now, that's true for domestic considerations. It's true in the case of any wage bargain that any group of workers reaches with a boss, which will immediately be undermined or taken back in some other way. Just the same way you can apply that to the imperialists on a bigger level. Never believe a single word they say. Never believe a single agreement that they sign will be stuck to. Never believe any commitments that they make. Because whether or not the official or the president or the prime minister that signs on the line means it, the system itself cannot afford restraint. Same is true of employers and wage deals in the imperialist countries. Same is true of imperialism on a much, much bigger level. And that's why you absolutely cannot trust a single word, especially US imperialism, but all the minor imperialist powers as well say. They have been behind this war from the start. Remember, their first resort here, the first method they tried to use to end it was to carry out the mass expulsion of the Palestinian population to Egypt, which even al-Sisi found too much to stomach, though he's done a lot of other things. And again, to turn back to the assassination of Nasrallah, his refusal to sell out the Palestinian cause is why they killed him. Had he, and I'm sure these offers were made by the US imperialists, they would have made all kinds of offers to try and get Hezbollah to sell out the Palestinian cause. You can imagine the kinds of things that they would have offered. Potential debt relief on the gigantic amount of debt that Lebanon finds itself in, all kinds of other agreements brokered possibly by the US themselves or possibly with Saudi involvement that would have seen some apparent concession made. Now, Nasrallah, to his enormous credit, and to the credit of the entire Hezbollah movement, it must be said, because again, Hezbollah is not one man or a group of men. It is an organic movement that arose over 40 years ago out of the oppressed Shia communities of southern Lebanon, the poorest and most oppressed section of Lebanon for a long time, and who bore the brunt of the Israeli invasion in the early 1980s, but who built an organization capable of chasing the Israelis out in the end. Now, after the assassination, because of Nasrallah's refusal to sell out the Palestinian struggle, and his refusal of the overtures of imperialism, the imperialists have opted for assassination. And that should not be a surprise to us. I will repeat what I have said ad nauseum, which is that if anybody thought that any of these struggles were going to go easy, then you're a fool. There's no way that the imperialists are just going to give up and pack up and go home from West Asia. It's never going to happen. It's too important, the region. It's too important for the strategic positions of US imperialism. It's too important with regards to their relationships with the the disgusting comprador regimes in the Gulf states and Jordan and Egypt. They will not allow, as they would see it, the Chinese to just walk in and take over from them, as this is how the imperialists see it. This isn't what the Chinese are doing, but this is how the imperialists see things. And this was always going to happen. They were always going to resort to the most extreme forms of brutality and violence, because this is what imperialists always do. And now it seems that what the Israelis are proposing to do next is lay siege to Lebanon itself, probably with the collaboration of certain elements within the comprador ruling class of Lebanon. Lay siege to Lebanon to try and break the will of the population, or try and reignite a Lebanese civil war. That would be their next option. So that in itself, if that is the route that Israel is choosing to pursue, is a sign of weakness. Because what they've done so far is they've tried to break the will of the Lebanese population to stand with Palestine. That hasn't worked. They've tried to decapitate Hezbollah as an organization to, it must be said, some degree of success. And if that doesn't work, they'll try and starve the population of Lebanon into submission. And again, Israel does the muscle work here, but all of the resources come directly from US imperialism itself. Cannot emphasize that enough. Do not allow them to hide. Do not allow them to hide behind their words about how they're frustrated with Netanyahu. No. All of this is irrelevant. Look at what they actually do. They're supplying all the weaponry. They're supplying all the technology. They're supplying a lot of the intelligence to make all of this happen. It is their war. It is just that they've got Israel as their outsourced muscle on the ground. The fact that Israel can't invade southern Lebanon without sustaining unacceptable levels of casualties does present a huge problem for them, though. And this, again, reveals the fact that the Israeli army is not fit to actually fight these wars that they're engaged in. So whilst this is clearly a setback for Hezbollah and the wider axis of resistance, it still reveals a certain weakness in the US imperialist forces. Now, here we get to a wider point, which is, well, where does the struggle go now? Now, here we must go back to first principles and say that the strength of the US imperialists in the region, because again, following the analysis of Nasrallah himself, it is the US imperialists who must be the principal target here. They are the ones who stand behind Israel. Without them, there is no Israel. That's been just as previously, without the British Empire, there'd be no Israel either. Without constant US support, Israel falls to pieces. So the question is the removal of the US from the region. And again, the fact that Nasrallah correctly identified that and understood that it was the US that was the major player here and that Israel was acting on its behalf at all times, wherein his analysis puts to shame those in the West who babble and gibber on about the Zionist cabal controlling things, which was always untrue. The Zionist state operates on behalf of US imperialism. Nasrallah understood that, and that's part of what made him a dangerous opponent. So, coming to the wider question then, the US imperialists have made it pretty damn clear what they intend to do. They intend to continue the slaughter in Gaza. They intend to try to starve Lebanon into submission. They've tried to batter Yemen into submission, and it hasn't worked so far. No doubt they will try and do things again. But their power in the region doesn't just rely on the fact that they are present on a small scale in Iraq, in a slightly bigger scale in Syria, in a bigger scale still in the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia. So that's part of their power. The much bigger part of their power lies in their relationship with the various different wretched regimes that exist in West Asia. So the Comprador King of Jordan, the Comprador President, dictator of Egypt, the dictators of the Gulf states, the Riyadh clique, the Al Saud family, ultimately also the Erdogan regime, which even though he has his rows with the US, he's still really and fundamentally an ally of theirs. No matter what the various multipolar theorists might delude themselves into thinking, yeah, he's still in the US camp. Turkey is still firmly in the US camp. Now, the Turkish masses might, and some of the Turkish masses might have other ideas about that. So that may change dependent upon how the struggle evolves in Turkey itself. But the Erdogan group, still in the US camp. This is what the power of US imperialism is fundamentally based on. And in Lebanon, it's based on the comprador ruling class and the stooges at the governmental level. Lebanon is not an independent country. It's controlled by the US via the Saudis. Quite a lot of that's the relationship there. And coming back to the assassination of Nasrallah and others in the Hezbollah leadership, this is what lies behind the Israeli success here, or I should say the US success here. Lebanon is flooded with intelligence agents, spies of all varieties, various different double agents, various informers, various intelligence assets of the US, the British, the French, Israel, Saudi Arabia. And even though Hezbollah has some very tough strongholds in Lebanon, their enemies have an awful lot of material to work with. And it'll be the human intelligence factor, I think, personally, that got them what they needed. Because it seems to me, and again, I haven't seen the full details of how they found the Hezbollah leaders to assassinate them just yet. It seems to me that they've probably known roughly where the Hezbollah leaders are from time to time for quite some time. And that's why they were able to, that's why they chose to act now, was because it was getting to a desperate point for the Israeli regime. They can't have victory without the return of the settlers to the north of occupied Palestine. If Netanyahu can't do that, then he's lost, and he knows it, which is why there was a final ultimatum delivered to the Hezbollah leadership recently, which is basically give up this struggle or else. And again, Nasrallah, to his enormous credit, said no, and that's why they've carried out the operation that they have over the past week. Interestingly enough, as I said earlier, not moving into southern Lebanon, not staging an invasion, because they know that they can't. That would be a disaster for them. So they're going to lay siege instead and see if that breaks the will of the Lebanese population. I don't think it will, but I think there's plenty of people inside Lebanon who are enemies of the Lebanese masses who, let's be blunt, if this struggle is to succeed, will need to be forced out. Because it's a miracle, not a miracle, but it's a testament to the organizational skill of the Hezbollah that they have managed to do this much so far, when at their back are 1,000 knives wielded by the Saudis and the Imperialists. And that, I think, is a situation which, to my mind, cannot continue for much longer. But we can come back to that in future episodes. Going back to the assassination, I mean, I think when the story finally does come out, and I mean the real story, not whatever bullshit tale the Israelis and the US come up with, we'll find that it was probably human intelligence that did this. And they'll find that there'll be some kind of compromised source within Lebanon that has given up this information, because even though the Israelis have got all this AI and various different intelligence, IT intelligence capabilities, ultimately it's the human intelligence factor which decides these things. One of the reasons why they got caught with their pants down on October the 7th was because Hamas had compromised the Israeli intelligence network inside Gaza and had basically turned all their human intelligence sources or killed them. That's why they were caught completely unawares, because their intelligence network had gone. So we'll find out in due course that I think that this was an old-fashioned human intelligence source that gave up this information. Who it was, how they did it, we don't know for now. But this is clearly a turning point in the struggle for liberation of West Asia. But I think that now it's only going to evolve, because by coming out into the open and doing this, it is clearly a sign of escalation and desperation on behalf of the US and the Israelis. But it's also going to evolve the struggle to another level, because now we're reaching a point where they've made it clear they're going to deliver only unbelievable violence in order to preserve their position. So if the liberation movement will respond accordingly. And I'm sure that whatever compromise in security has happened, and it seems to me that there is certainly some, will get sorted out eventually. Now, where next is the interesting question. And here I want to address a point that can be best addressed by us here in the West, because there's going to be a lot of people wringing their hands with despair about this, so I did want to address it. The question of what we do is an interesting one, because to my mind, even though there has been a lot of demonstrations and a lot of demands raised of the British government, it's not going to make a blind bit of difference. Not really. I mean, these are good for raising awareness demonstrations. They're good for contacting people and educating people. But in reality, there's not going to be a change in British government policy. They are going to stick with Israel until the bitter fucking end, just as they will stick with the Saudis and the Gulf states to the bitter fucking end. All of these relationships are far too important for any individual British government to change policy on them. Same in the US. It's a question of the US, British, and overall imperialist position in West Asia, and that they will defend that no matter what. And so let's come back to the point about, well, what can we do? And unfortunately, I don't have easy answers for you. I'm not going to pretend that there's some sort of miracle that you can stick your name on a petition and somehow it'll reach David Lammy's desk and he'll have a crisis of conscience. No, that's not going to happen. The only way this ends, truly ends, is if US imperialism itself is dismantled. Now, ultimately, that can only be done for good by the US proletariat itself. Just the same as with the remains of British imperialism, that can only be dismantled by those of us in Britain. But what we can do is at least start popularizing the idea that its network of bases from which it resupplies Israel, and of course by extension, and also it resupplies their stooge regime in Ukraine, that the bases in Europe and the bases in Britain need to go. That is something that should be raised at every Palestine demo now. And if you're watching this from the Irish Republic, also this is something which I would say needs to be raised with regard to the possibility in the near future that there might be some kind of deal over a united Ireland, because you know that what that will come with is essentially Ireland getting crowbarred into NATO. So you'll have replaced a British occupation in the occupied 6 counties with an American occupation of the entire 32-county republic, which is, of course, is not much of an improvement. So with regard to the Irish as part of this, also the demand for strict neutrality, no entry into NATO, should be raised. With regard to Britain, I think that the demand should be popularized that all of the American bases need to go, all of them, that they are not necessary for the security of us, the great majority, the great masses of Britain, that they are only necessary for the security of the profits of the ruling class. Now, there's a lot of disgust and a lot of rage out there in all countries about the role of imperialism in West Asia, but there is still not a lot of clarity about it. But I think this could bring some clarity to it. Like, Israel is able to do what it does because it is one of the sword arms of US imperialism in West Asia. It is able to carry on doing this because it gets resupplied constantly by the US. The US is able to resupply it constantly through its network of bases, principally in Europe. That's what enables this. And so that's what we need to focus on. Raising at this stage the demand that we get the US empire out of Britain and out of Europe. And we can make the link specifically. There's coverage been done in some fairly mainstream sources saying that the US is resupplying Israel via bases in Britain. Well, then let's make that point. Let's make that point that this murderous rampage that the Zionist regime has been on for over a year, nearly a year now, is enabled via the supply chain that comes through our countries. And so that's the demand. Now, of course, that's the demand that no British government will want to address, but that's what needs to be exposed to all people who are outraged about this. That how you stop it, you stop the ability of the US to actually resupply Israel. And that means its bases in Britain, that means its bases in Europe, that means its ability to use Irish airspace. All of that is the issue that people need to be made aware of, because I think there's too many who are not aware of it. And by doing that, we can at least have people see that the reason why they are able to do this is because of NATO membership. It's because of the US imperial network of bases all the way across Europe. That's why all of this is possible. And so it comes back to a point about dismantling the US presence in Europe and dismantling NATO, because the NATO membership is a key part of all of this. Now, not a lot of people inside the official leadership of the Palestine Solidarity cause want to deal with that, because a lot of them, have compromised themselves completely over the war in Ukraine. But you can't get away from it. The NATO component is absolutely crucial in keeping Israel resupplied. And again, look at the duplicitous role of the Erdogan regime in Turkey, if you want an example of the wider problem here. So that's one of the things that we need to start raising on the demonstrations and raising with people in conversation. To anybody who's disgusted by the bloody rampage of Israel, we need to point out, well, who's really doing it? Who's behind it all? It's US imperialism and its allies, and it's those states who follow along with it. That's where the killing blows ultimately come from. Israel does the dirty work. Netanyahu is the villain who will carry the can for all of this. But ultimately, again, he's a servant. He's a servant of US imperial power. They could stop him at any time they wanted to, but they don't want to, because Hezbollah has become an active danger to the continued existence of US imperialism in the region, or it's one of the key components in this axis of resistance. And therefore they are going to go all out to try and destroy it now. And that is where we are. And there's no point in pretending otherwise. Right. Let's go up and see who's with us. I'm not on for long tonight, but I did want to just jump on and say a few words about where things stood. So, good evening to Jerry. Good evening to Unstable Genetics. Good evening to More Time Needed, our correspondent in Skeggy. Sid Hatfield, good afternoon to you. Brad Wall, good evening to you. Tim Gray, good evening to you. Good evening to Comrade Jawad. And Banana Bender, who says good morning from the other side of the world. Hello to HM, who I believe is resident in the Brighton hellscape. John Barleycorn, hello. Kawabi, hello to you. Dr. Fu Man Shu says good evening, and I say good evening back. BWP, hello. Arnold Blaine, hello. Chester, well, I had to say something today, didn't I? Glad you're finding this stream illuminating. Hello to Vera. Hello to Jeremy. Hello to Abtin, who says rise up. And Comrade Ian Foster. And Ocean 2035, who says, as a matter of fact, never trust just words of anti-war or anti-imperialism who cringy way promoting a leader of bourgeois like Trump or Kamala. Yeah, never trust anybody who tells you to vote for either of them. CF Kronos, hello. Dr. Fu Manchu says, NBC on an Israeli official, Nasrallah rejected all demands to stop associating himself with Gaza and expanded the scope of attacks on Israel. Well, I mean, that's actually true. I mean, the Israeli official there quoted was actually being rather honest for once, which is Nasrallah rejected the demands to give up the struggle, and that's when the Israelis decided to take him out. And again, they've escalated this struggle again to another level now. TL Orca says every credit card company, all fast food, all weapon manufacturers. I think you're suggesting a boycott there. Yeah, like just to add something further. I mean, if you're in an oppressed nation, subjected to the brutishness of imperialism, like, and you're looking and you are part of a movement which is looking to free your country from imperialism. Look at the countries that have managed to secure themselves most comprehensively against imperialism, even small nations. Well, the only one who's really managed to do it to a great degree of success, and completely free themselves, almost completely, is of course the DPRK. And what lesson can we take from the DPRK? They're self-sustaining as much as possible in all the essentials of life, but also they have as little to do with the structures run by US imperialism as possible. So they don't let in, like, the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and like they heavily restrict what can come in from the imperialist countries. That's the only correct way to deal with this. Like, you let any organization run by imperialism into your country, you are basically pumping poison into your veins, no matter what it's dressed up as. USAID, NED, NGO stuff. People are starting to realize this now and wake up to it. But like, you let any of these imperialist organizations, which are completely run by the US, everything from the UN to the World Health Organization, all run by imperialism, all run by them for their own purposes. You can't let any of them in. You can't have anything to do with them. Nor should you allow in, well, most of imperialist culture, to be honest, because it's all brain rot designed to basically corrode your own population. So you must really cut off the West. That's the only way to do it. It's the only way to free yourself from their filthy and disgusting influences, which only seeks to subordinate and destroy your nation. Cut yourself off from them. Now, they've done a favor to the Russians by essentially cutting themselves off, but I hear that the IMF wants to send a mission to Russia. The Russians should just reject it out of hand. What good would it do? You can't have any relationship with imperialism that doesn't involve them trying to destroy any semblance of sovereignty or independence that you have, and then reduce your nation to abject penury and submission. That's the only agenda that they've got. So you can't have anything to do with it. No matter what, how clever you might think you're being, or no matter what security measures you think you've got in place, you open the door to this nest of vampires and they will eat you alive. Penguin says we need a national liberation struggle in Britain. Yeah. Well, we will get there once our people realise, or our class realises, where the sources of oppression lie. Lone Bart says, what will Iran's policy be on this matter? Well, we'll have to see. I don't want to speculate for now. Harry Haller says, Israel is doing all these things because they know that Turkey and the other Arab states will not intervene. Well, Israel is doing all these things not only because the other Arab states won't do jack shit, that's true, but also because they are doing them on behalf of the US. The US is completely behind them. That's why they're doing it. Chester says, I met a Turkish dude at a rally today who professed his support for Israel. Very strange man. Well, there's always a few. What they're actually expressing is their support for US imperialism. That's what they're expressing. Edward says, Latvian communists stand with Palestine. Good man. Good evening to Peter, who joins us from perfidious Albion. Mutanda says, the Duran reckon there was a tacit agreement between Israel and Hezbollah not to target leaders until now. The lack of air defense in Lebanon means they will get hammered indefinitely. Yeah, I mean, that might be true. I'm not sure about it. Might have been a tacit agreement there. I'm not sure of that. I'm pretty sure that what actually got the final decision made was Nasrallah refusing to sell out on the Palestinian struggle. That's what probably got Israel to do what they did. Jay Blue says the only reason they killed Hezbollah leadership is because head of Unit 8200 got killed in a Hezbollah strike on their base. Yeah, so you might be right about that. I mean, I don't know the details, but I think it's more likely because Hezbollah turned down any and all offers or refused to give in to the threats made by imperialism regarding the war in the north, and kept insisting that any ceasefire had to be accompanied by a ceasefire in Gaza. Which again, if Netanyahu agreed to that, he would be finished. So I think it's mainly about the situation in the north of the country, and the fact that that's come to a critical point for the Israeli regime where it has to address it. They have to try and do something, because otherwise they're going to be fucked. John says, what about Iranian security being compromised, just like Hezbollah security being breached? Head of intel of Hezbollah just killed in his second-hour-old new secret hiding place. Could well be that they've compromised Hezbollah security, or perhaps Iranian. I mean, the US has got a lot of money and a lot of resources to throw around inside Lebanon, and they've got a lot of resources that they can try and use to influence things inside Iran as well. I mean, it's not for nothing that I say over and over again that if the Soviets hadn't done their purges in the 1930s, they might well have lost that struggle against the Nazis, or at least it would have been a lot more difficult had they not dealt with the traitors in their midst. Rista Costadino says, liberals in Turkey do support Israel, even though they even despise many of their countrymen for not being civilized like people in the EU. Liberals anywhere are the worst, whether they are Turkish or whether they're British. Tim Gray makes the correct point and says it's important not to fall for the propaganda campaign the West is flooding social media. It is designed to sow discord, fear and panic. Yes, that's true. Harry Haller says, you are overestimating this independence movement. Yes, they are motivated, but they don't have the necessary means to defeat Israel alone. True. The struggle will need to escalate. There's no other way about it. It will need to grow to the point where it chases out the comprador regimes in Egypt and Jordan. I mean, Lebanon alone, even if the compradors got chased out of there and the whole country was led by Hezbollah, couldn't defeat US imperialism. It's only going to come through multiple getting US imperialism bogged down to the point where it can't win in multiple different areas. And that means getting rid of the comprador regimes, because they're a key pillar to this, as Nasrallah knew. And that's the reason why these comprador regimes will be delighted that he's dead. Sid Hatfield says, all of the usual bourgeois channels for potential change in the US have already been exhausted ad infinitum, so there is no redress in that direction. Yeah, there's no way to change this system internally. It can't be. It's too far gone. There was precisely one era of real reform, and we've been through why that happened and why it ended. And now there's no way through this system to change it. There just isn't. Until we realise that properly, and again, this is going to take a lot of people. A lot of people know, I think, that voting changes nothing. I think perhaps not in the middle class, but in the working class they know that. But it's taking that level of awareness from just knowing that it doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican or Labour or Tory, or, you know, Fine Gael or Fine Gael, or Macron or Le Pen. That there's a difference between knowing that it doesn't make much difference to knowing what to do about it, and that's the next stage. We must start educating people as to why it is that it doesn't change, what it means, how we got to this point. Because a lot of people are wandering around getting angry and very confused right now, and what you're finding is that we're everywhere in the world, we're hitting the limits of the established order. Like, same is true for the Russian struggle in Ukraine, which I think they'll win in the end. But again, it's exposing the limits of the Putin system in Russia, as I've said before. This struggle in West Asia is exposing the limits of how resistance has been conducted up to now. Faced with this amount of violence coming from the US imperialists, then it will necessitate another change. The way that resistance has been conducted up to now clearly isn't enough to uproot the US imperialists from the West Asia. They are capable of even greater and more enormous forms of violence, and will engage in them up to the point where they can't sustain themselves anymore. Just scrolling through the comments here. I'm going to have to knock off in a moment. Protests in October in Ireland. Try and be there if you can to stand against these criminals. Descend on Shannon, says the Risen People era. Good on you. Shannon M. Townsend says denazify NATO. Well, if you do that, there's no more NATO. So, yeah. Hello to Nikki Const. Hello to Dinner with Franklin. Right. Hello to Sofiak. Hello to Yuan, who asks, is Russia dampening Yemen's desire to teach the Gulf compradors a lesson or two? Well, maybe, and this is the point that I've made many times, that this multipolar system, which a lot of people are frankly overestimating, is not going to be enough. Like, the Gulf compradors and the Saudis and the Egyptian regime being in BRICS tells you what the limitations of BRICS are, as does the fact that the Russians have their deals with these comprador elements as well. And like, they'll remain disgusting reactionary comprador elements, whether they're tied via an umbilical cord with the US or not. Like, again, like, this is revealing bit by bit the limitations of how struggles have been conducted up to now in our own country and elsewhere. Like, for us, like, marching around London and demanding things of a government which not only will not listen, it can't listen. It can't give up its position in West Asia, because that means the end of it. You're asking imperialism to end itself. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do demonstrations. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't use them as an opportunity to raise people's awareness and consciousness. It just means we need to be straight with people about, well, who are you addressing the demands to? I'm talking here about Britain and the imperialist countries. Who are we addressing things to? To Keir Starmer? Well, you can get rid of him tomorrow and you can put, I don't know, Kemi Badenoch in there from the Tories, and the policy would be the same. Because again, our people need to realise just what we're dealing with here. You're not dealing with just a bunch of stupid politicians or a bunch of corrupt politicians or a bunch of psycho politicians, even though those are all factors. You're dealing with imperialism as a system. And imperialism as a system cannot give in to the demands of the Palestine Solidarity Movement, even the more moderate ones, because that would mean the end of their position in West Asia. And until people understand that, our struggle is going to be very ineffective. And that's why we must go to these demonstrations. We must talk to as many people as we can about the real situation, about what we can actually do. Because addressing these demands to any politician in the London Parliament is useless. Useless. Mark Sloboda said that Palestine is ultimately doomed and that the Palestinians will become an exiled people like the Jews were. Your thoughts? I think Mark Sloboda spends a lot of his time online spreading prophet of doom messaging, basically. I stopped listening to him a long time ago because basically every single time he came on, he would basically be saying, just spreading what I would see as like professional doom mongering. Problem with guys like that is that they don't appear to understand how national liberation movements have fought and won liberation before. And you find that with a lot of these like multipolar fucking clowns. Like they think that the BRICS system is going to be the panacea. They think that China is going to usher in some new and stable world order. No, none of that is going to happen. What we're witnessing is the opening up of a very long period of national liberation struggles, revolutions, and counter-revolutions. History has never really stopped, but now we are back in the period of intense struggles in the West and the East. And a lot of people don't want to admit to that. Sloboda is one of them. So I don't pay much attention to him, to be honest. Good evening to Irish Partisan, who has joined us. Right, okay. Right. Ash asked, do you think Iran will step in here? I don't know at this stage. Difficult. I mean, the difficulty is like, well, what can they actually do at this stage? I mean, I know that they can send people to support Hezbollah. They can get them over, even if the airspace is closed, they can get them through Syria into Lebanon. So this is that is one way they can support. I mean, Iran's got to resolve its own contradictions, though, because, and I think that the hostility of the imperialists will help do that. But there's like still a section of the Iranian bourgeois that think that there's going to be some kind of deal on the table with the West. The only deal that the US is going to offer Iran is total submission and a return to the relationship that existed under the days of the Shah. And until the Iranian system and all those in the Iranian system that matter realize that, then their response is going to be somewhat limited. I mean, what's coming about now is that there must be a realization of just how far imperialism is prepared to go and what kind of response is needed. Look, the only way that imperialism ever negotiated anything was if literally they were too terrified not to. That's why they ultimately had to negotiate in the 70s with the USSR, because they'd lost the Vietnam War. And again, don't pay any attention to those who say, oh, they lost because of the American anti-war movement. They didn't. They lost because they lost the battle inside Vietnam. And yes, then because they lost that battle, their own army fell apart. Now, that is how these struggles are ultimately won. It's not won by petitions or polite conversations in Parliament. And that realization will have to come to many in the oppressed nations. There's no easy way out of this. Imperialism will keep ramping up the violence until it believes it's won. Again, this isn't a controversial thing to say. They're saying it out in the open now. Biden came out and openly welcomed the death of Nasrallah. Of course he did. He's welcoming the death of an enemy of US imperialism. A real enemy, not a fake enemy like bin Laden was. Right. So, I will now have to draw things to a close because I am on a limited schedule this evening. I will be back tomorrow, though, for more. We will be talking tomorrow about, it's our show on the Marxist History of World War II show. We'll be doing that. I've had to postpone the Stalin show due to recent events, but that will be, I'm sure, Comrade Stalin would approve of this delay. But I'll be trying to get that in either tomorrow or Monday. So stay tuned for that one. Be back again with you tomorrow. But until then, good night and solidarity.